Hi, it is a pleasure to be part of this panel. My presentation relates to a branch of a wider research project that I am currently developing. The project calls Portuguese Sea Anthropological and Ethnographic Engagements with the Natural, and it runs since 2017. Basically, it deals with the ongoing territorial expansion of Portugal through the floors of the Atlantic Ocean. I added the link of the project there in case you want to know more about it. In this project, Portugal is Sea, I concentrate on various types of ocean knowledge, including, of course, the ocean knowledge produced by marine scientists. And this is why I arrived at the scientists who work on the sediments that cover the Portuguese ocean floors. In this presentation, I put forward some preliminary thoughts related to this subfield in my research, the field that deals with marine sediments. Carla, a fictitious name of a real person, is a Portuguese postdoctoral researcher specialized in the marine sediments located at the continental shelf of the Guadiana River in the south of Portugal. She obtained her PhD in marine science at the University of Algarve in 2010. Since then, Carla has jumped from one research project to another research project in the Center for Marine and Environmental Research at the University of Algarve. I met her on an afternoon in June 2019. We had a long conversation, mostly about her work on the marine sediments. She introduced me to her research in the space where she develops that research, which were her office, the canteen, and the lab. All three are on the campus of Gambelas from the University of Algarve. At the lab, Carla directs me to a long white desk that is covered with various materials. This is where I spend most of my days and where I ruin my neck and my eyes, she says. Carla initiates a nervous monologue about the sense of injustice, precariousness, and exhaustion in her work. This is a common path in my conversations with known tenure marine scientists in Portugal. A few minutes after, she stops with her topic and asks me if I want to see her doing the activities she usually does in the lab. I agree. Carla grabs a small plastic jar containing marine sediments, takes them out of the jar, spreads them on a picking tray, and begins the exhaustive task of isolating each grain of sediment with a brush tool. She stains the grains with a solution of ethanol and rose bengal, which allows us to distinguish between the foraminifera that were alive or dead at the time of collection. Foraminifera are single-cell organisms that live in the seafloor sediment. Finally, she grabs a tweezer and takes a grain from the tray and puts it on a thin, flat piece of glass, which she places under the lens of a binocular microscope. Carla sits on a high chair, bends her neck over the microscope, and looks through the eyepieces. She talks to me again and says, "The Iberian landscape changed radically with the Roman rule. There was an increase in the exploitation of vegetation and woodland, and large-scale mining also started. This led to widespread soil erosion, which in turn led to an increase of sediment flux to the sea, including through the Guadiana River. Static, concentrated on the magnified image of the minuscule sediment grain, Carla proceeds with her story. It involves the Roman and medieval Islamic rules of the Iberian Peninsula, the question of population growth, the mines along the Iberian Pyrite Belt, and agricultural developments such as the wheat campaign during the 1930s. She switches to a different timescape and starts narrating about the future. For example, she says that the sea level will rise at a rate of at least 3 millimeters per year. The intertidal zone will expand and the low and mid-marsh, namely the herbaceous plants living in the wetland, will be forced to migrate to survive. The built landscape will have to change, otherwise marsh species will disappear from the region. Her stories about the future end with her rising from the chair and moving away from the microscope. It was a sequence of reenactments, a process of ethnographic collaboration in which Carla performed her activities as she would normally do them to me. As a performance of science by a scientist, her reenactments indicated a relationship with authenticity and normativity. Authenticity because it meant to convey real or true routines, and normativity because it involved her attempt at reproducing what is right to do in the science of sediments. Carla told me those stories while looking through the microscope. It was like if she was reading aloud a book about the past and the future of the Iberian Peninsula. The science of sediments, to draw on the literary critic Roland Barthes, is a practice of material interpretation in which the reader is no longer a consumer but a producer of narrative. In his book SC, Barthes used the terms readerly and writerly to distinguish respectively between texts that are straightforward and texts that involve the reader in the construction of meaning. In the science of sediments, marine sediments are a kind of literary texts to the scientists who use them to produce world-building narratives. Yet sediments are intertextual. That is, they do not operate in isolation but are woven out of other elements. Many agencies are at stake here, agencies that intervene in the stories that the marine scientists produce while examining or reading, as I prefer to say, the sediments. For example, the story that Carla read in The Grain emerged also in connection with the articles and books written by historians and archaeologists about the Iberian Peninsula, as well as scientific catalogues of sediments, different types of technology, media, material resources, and even the socio-political conditions that she vented about. As with all the other marine scientists with whom I have worked, her scientific knowledge incorporates her learnings, experience, and feelings. Here I draw on Karen Barrett's take on quantum theory. Inspired by the work of Niels Bohr, Barrett says that scientific versions of reality are defined by the circumstances required for their measurement. In other words, and now I use the words of human geographer Kimberly Peters, data are always the mirror of their creator. This means stories such as that told by Carla, including about the future, are inseparable from the agencies of their creation, observation, and revelation. Most of the narratives the sediments generate in science are about continuity. The tiny grains of marine sediments incorporate or relate to phenomena that happen on land, in the atmosphere, as well as in the seas and oceans. They embody and tell about the continuity between such dimensions. Peters and Steinberg say that the presence of the ocean exceeds the space of its waters as it exists outside of it, such as in the air, for example in the mist, and in the immersed solid matter, such as the ice. It also generates winds which transport its smells miles inland. The ocean, they say, must be interpreted through a more than wet ontology of excess. Marine sediments are part of the materiality of such excess. They embody a broad universe of relations, wet and dry, and constitute what Anderson and Wiley call the materiality that is beyond itself. My argument is that this character of excess and continuity, of unboundedness beyond itself, is not just in the materiality but also in the stories the scientists tell from the marine sediments. More conspicuously, marine sediments point to this continuity of excess also concerning time. Marine sediments are a kind of a means for scientists to make a bridge between the past and future. Anthropologists Matthews and Barnes say that the question of the past has always also been a question of the future. Accordingly, scientists read the sediments proxy data, that is, the pasts the marine sediments embody, to make predictions, or more specifically, to foresee the change trends in the climate and the planet at large. Curiously, in the time span between past and future that the marine sediments embody, the present has a lesser value. Marine sedimentology disrupts the dominant conception of time, at least in North Atlantic societies, that privileges the present, what the political economist Harold Adams Innis called the modern obsession with present-mindedness. Marine sediments are then texts about that which is not present. The graphics, maps, images, and narratives that the marine scientists produce by reading the sediments are intended to generate presence out of absences. Marine sediments are archives of the future, worked on as a crystal ball for revealing the world to come. This ultimately puts marine sediments at the center of predictive politics. Indeed, marine sediments are increasingly becoming important resources of future making, and therefore they are part of new modalities of governing through predictions and anticipations. The inclusion of interpretations based on sediment reading in the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is an example of how marine sediments are gaining weight in policymaking. So to finalize, I suggest interpreting the role of marine sediments in such modalities of governance as writerly texts, which involve the active role of marine scientists, their readers, in producing the visions of the future that the sediments bring about. This implies the recognition that the futures read through the sediments come saturated not just with neutral and strictly objective reasoning, but also with the messy and affective forces involved in their reading. Moreover, the science of marine sediments is a field in which imagination becomes an important resource, since, as Sheila Jasanoff puts, narrating any vision of a future world requires a leap into a fictive, unrealized landscape of dreams rather than one of tangible reality. Therefore, considering sediments as writerly texts, I conclude by risking the thesis that marine sediments are part of a broader shift in which social power moves from the production of materials to the materials of production, from those who produce materials to those who use materials to produce, and from materiality as an end to materiality as a means. And the growing significance that the stories read in marine sediments are gaining in policymaking and governance reflects that shift. Thank you.